Hey guys, thanks a lot for being there for this talk. It's the afternoon slump period, so I'm sure a lot of you are feeling sleepy, tired, or getting low fatigue. So I'm going to make it as story-based as possible. I'm a journalist by training, so stories are what we do for our craft, and I'm going to try sticking to a story format for this talk as well. So my project's name is VoiceDeck. And we are trying to create a decentralized outcome funding platform for investigative reporters. So I think it's funny that the Web3 space has so many different funding mechanisms, like quadratic funding, public goods staking with Octant, as we saw earlier. But we don't still have a model for funding based on outcomes, which is weird because the real world has this. It's called social impact bonds, where the government pays a provider only if they achieve the outcomes. It's very conditional, but we don't have that in our space. So that's what we are trying to do for investigative reporting as our first thing. So again, just like a quick intro to who I am. So I am a journalist, and I started about 8 years ago in college. I started a magazine called St. Stephen's Weekly. And in the first issue, we interviewed the principal of our college, and he said things like the vice chancellor is not giving us enough money, and they are creating problems for us. So we ran all of that and his video, and then he decided to ban our magazine. So he banned the magazine. I spoke out to the media saying we are supposed to be the best liberal arts college in India, and the principals banned this publication. What's going on? So he didn't like that very much. He started a discipline committee against me, which suspended me a week before graduation. I then filed a lawsuit against my principal, and I won. So that was the first example of actually being able to fight back against people who try censoring you. And it got featured in all the major articles and publications in India. And winning that was really the main kind of motivation for me to also get into journalism and censorship resistance and all of those good things. After that, I joined the Columbia Journalism School, where I focused on investigative reporting. While the case with Stephen's Weekly taught me how to mess around with individuals, I really wanted to mess around with systems, which is what investigative reporting lets you do. So I was very lucky to be in the journalism school at the time that the Panama Papers came out. So a lot of my professors were involved in those investigations, and I got to work with one of the professors in that. So finally, I got it published in the OCCRP, which covered the Panama Papers for Eurasia, Azerbaijan, the full Caucasus region. And I basically found that an airlines which was owned by the Azerbaijan dictator's daughter had got Pentagon contracts and a loan guarantee from the US, and it was a quid pro quo for US to access Azerbaijan airspace. The dictator said use this airlines, which he happened to have a stake in. And that created impact. There were calls for US Congress to investigate, and there was a big blowback from it. At one point, even the CEO stepped down, who's back now, but he stepped down in the aftermath of it. So it created some nice impact over there. While I was at the Columbia Journalism School, one of the reporters called Shubhranshu from CGNet Swara, he came to give a talk, and some of the ideas he described were just mind-blowing, which were, we have democracy in politics, but we don't have democracy in the media, where we have kings, we have owners of media, where we have ministers, we now have reporters. So how can we actually start democratizing the media was something that he was working on. So after graduation, I went to work with CGNet on creating this idea of bringing democracy to the media. And we worked in a war zone in central India. So there's been a civil war going on for around 50 years over there in central India. So I spent 5 years over there trying to make the locals who were caught between both sides to make them reporters who can use their own voice. And so they would report into a server, which was a toll-free number they could call and report into. Editors would review it, fact-check it, publish it, and then volunteers would try to create some solutions to the problem. Solutions like, okay, the teacher is not coming to a school in a war-torn area. So we would tell the government officers that, hey, the teacher's not coming, and then the teacher would start coming. So we created this loop for around 5 years over there. In all of this, I started VoiceDeck because like when I graduated, we had a lot of grants intended for alumni who start their own companies. That was a very weird motivation to start a company, but that was how it started. So we incorporated VoiceDeck, and I got to work in those areas with the money that I raised independently. We wanted several business models for the journalism that creates very tangible impact. So if you look at like the OCCRP or the Panama Papers side, the tangible impact is things like a court case being filed because of your story, an asset seizure, it's being reprinted in several other media outlets. So that's one sort of impact in journalism. And the second sort of impact is things like a teacher coming to school, a road being repaired, garbage being cleared up, and some of the more local sorts. So I've always been looking for a business model for this sort of journalism because it can never get enough eyeballs to recover its investment. Whereas what I call situational awareness journalism, what's going on in Ukraine, what's happening with US politics, all of that does have a business model, which is eyeballs and advertisements. But the stories that take 1 year to report and create huge impact, like those have zero business model. So I've been focusing on that niche of journalism. Our first experiment was something called Learn to Earn, where it was an advertising model where we paid people in mobile recharge credits for listening to content and answering a quiz to show that they've understood the content. So because in a lot of rural parts of India, they didn't have digital payment, we would pay them in mobile recharges. Like we basically recharge their phone and give them voice credits. So that didn't work for a variety of reasons. I also created an app to share news through Bluetooth, because in a lot of those war-stricken areas, they didn't have internet, but they all would use Bluetooth to transfer videos and files to one another. So I created a way for news media to share their stories through Bluetooth in that region, which got published at forums. But it didn't take up because I saw that even though they didn't have internet, every week they used to go to the market where they did have internet. So even if they don't have all the time internet access, most populations have intermittent internet access. They can still access internet once a week or even more than that sometimes. Then in 2020, the lockdowns happened and the pandemic. And during this time, we had a lot of phone calls from distressed populations saying that we are stuck in cities, we don't have any food, we don't know how we are going to survive. And in this time, we engaged a network of urban people like you and me to actually help these people get food. So we used to call up officers and say, hey, there's this person in this area who needs food. It was a really hectic time. I got basically 4 or 5 hours of sleep in the 7 weeks of the pandemic because we were just getting so many calls that we had to process. In 2021, we saw that the situation in India changed. Almost everyone had a smartphone or internet. Every village had a smartphone or internet. So the same phone number that people were calling up to report their own stories, we integrated that phone number with the WhatsApp Business API. So anyone can now take out their phone and just send a WhatsApp audio message, and that gets published and that can be moved forward. So we moved from IVR for people with feature phones, which are not smartphones, to WhatsApp API, which for people with smartphones, and now to blockchain. That's the connection that we want to make, IVR to WhatsApp to blockchain. Where is the blockchain element? So around this time, I got very burnt out because I was just writing a lot of grant applications. And for everyone here who's written, that's a very burning out and burnout-inducing process. So I began thinking, what can a model look like where I never need to write another grant application? That was the problem statement I set out. So the answer we came up with was something called impact certificates. So currently, if you look at it, we are on the before impact certificate side, which is that we raise money, we create some impact, and then we have to spend the next 6 months marketing that impact, and then hopefully we get to raise more money. So there's no real feedback loop. So the optimum strategy, if you want to maximize revenue as a nonprofit, is create impact for 3 months in the year, and then for 9 months of the year, go to as many conferences as you can and try to sell it to as many funders as you can. The reason for that is that you can sell your impact multiple times. There's no method to stop you from doing that. So if you can get a meeting with 15 funders, you can sell your impact 15 times. Whereas with impact certificates, you create impact. That allows you to generate an impact certificate, which in this case might be my story got a court case filed against someone. So that's an impact certificate. It got a road repaired in a village. That's another impact certificate. Someone buys that impact certificate, which gives you money, which you can use to create your next impact, which is your next impact certificate. So we already know that blockchains are pretty good at solving the problem of trouble selling. But why can't we use that same mechanism to stop people from selling their impact also multiple times? If we can solve the double spending problem, we can solve the double selling problem of impact as well. And the last point I'll make here is that the existing system is extremely discriminatory to organizations that don't have English speakers. I was the only English speaker on the team, so that's why I was doing the fundraising. But when grassroots organizations creating impact don't speak English, they're completely removed from the grants game. Whereas with impact certificates, that's not the case anymore. They don't need a brand. They need to create good impact, and you fund that impact. It's like buying a product rather than buying a service, which grant agreements are all service-based, whereas impact certificates are product-based. So you actually level the playing field, and you can get more startups in the social sector with it. So this is how we then started. Once we had our idea in 2022, this is the journey of how we managed to get things built out. So we started with quadratic funding. And the beautiful thing about quadratic funding is that you're always going to get a non-zero amount of money, right? So in a typical grant application, it's an all or nothing game. Either you get the entire $15,000, $20,000 you've applied for, or you get $0 out of that. Whereas with quadratic funding, you'll always get some amount of money. If it could be even $2,000, it could be even $500, but you always get something as long as you get 5 people to come and donate to your project. So that allowed us to build up a reputation, allowed us to get some traction, and just allowed us to survive. So quadratic funding is great for keeping the mission alive. It allowed me to meet my costs and to travel and to build networks and relations and really reach the next level. After that, we went to hackathons. So hackathons are great for recruiting a team. That's the main objective of a hackathon. So we worked with Funding the Commons and Biddlebox. And we managed to get, on Discord, I posted, this is my project. I got a great designer from Portugal, a smart contract developer from Vietnam, and we managed to build out a rough prototype, which also got us $9,000. We came second place, and we split the money. So the deal with hackathons which you make with recruits is that if we win, we'll split the money. And if we lose, it's fine. We put in effort and we lost. But you still made progress on your idea, and that's what's actually key about it. It's a win-win either way. If you lose, you've made progress on your idea. If you win, you get some money you can use to continue surviving and being in the game, which is really half the challenge in the social sector, just being in the game long term. So all of the progress we made on the top 2 allowed us to finally reach number 3, which is getting direct support, where you can build things out. So I applied for the Ethereum Next Billion program, and that was a life-changing program, the Ethereum Foundation's Next Billion Fellowship, where the support they give is basically one-on-one meetings. They give you, for 6 months, you meet with their team one-on-one, and they try to identify what's blocking you from reaching the next level of progress. And what they found in my case was that we had 3 media outlets with a database of impact, but there was no content management system to upload it. There was no way to bring it on chain in an easy way. So they connected me with another team called Polin Labs. And Polin Labs, as you can see from the name Polin, they move from project to project. And they built it out for 3-4 months, and then they moved to the next project. So they chose my project, built out the first, what they call minimum lovable product, and we managed to, and right now we've launched on testnet. So that was a big kudos to the entire program. And we managed to get some money from RetroPGF, which is a Hedgie's share of it. So Hedgie decided to distribute their RetroPGF to 4 different projects through a competition on Joke Race, which we managed to win. So this is where we are right now. So this is our minimum viable prototype, which we've built out. So the citizen or the journalist reports some issue. a community works to solve that issue. After it gets resolved, an impact report is published on their website. So the main criteria we have for any organization that wants to work with us is you have to have a data, like impact reports published on your website, that we published a story on this date and on this other date, like the issue got resolved, and here's the URL on our website documenting this. Because I see a lot of people who want to use crypto to fund real-world projects, and the advice I always give them is don't make it a one-way street, that we'll give you money and you go do work. That's the wrong way for us in the crypto world to fund real-world. It should always be a two-way street where, okay, you come and you mint some artifact of yours on chain, and then we will purchase that artifact. So even the organization is entering the crypto world in a very real way. They're buying up block space to actually mint their artifacts on chain. They're giving their reputation to actually put something on chain with their organization. And we are also giving them money. So it's a two-way street in that form. So the impact report, after it gets published on their website, this is where we come in on the bottom. We evaluate the report, which I'm going to talk about 2 slides from now. We publish the impact certificate on chain. So there's a protocol built by Protocol Labs called HyperCerts. So we use HyperCerts. It's an off-the-shelf smart contract for impact certificates. So we use them to publish things on chain. Customers can then purchase these impact certificates directly, and that then supports the media outlet. So they never need to write grant applications. Yeah, like that's the problem we set out to do. All they need to do is create impact, someone buys that impact, and they have money for their next impact. So it's much more efficient for everyone involved. Otherwise, like you spend about 33% of your time writing grant applications, 33% doing admin work to service those grant applications, and you only get a third of your time for actually creating impact, which is incredibly inefficient use of these people's time. This is the minimum lovable product, which you can go on our website and see right now. So you have, we worked with 3 media outlets. So these are the stories that we've taken. So one of them is women, like the bottom one here. Women weren't allowed to go to a temple in India because menstruation is considered impure in many parts, so they weren't allowed into the inner sanctum. And after the journalist reported on this, the temple had to reverse its policy, and women were finally allowed into the sanctum, which is amazing impact. Like, you're changing social attitudes and customs, and you're adding dignity. We also had another great one, which was a human trafficker got arrested and put behind bars. Which is just incredible on so many levels, that a journalist could come and record it and get the police to mobilize and take action against them. One of the teachers was stealing from the midday meal scheme. The midday meal allows children to get free lunch in school, which is the reason that attendance rates have shot up in India. But this teacher was trying to embezzle money from that, and children weren't getting fed because the teacher was taking the funds from it. So all of these sort of impacts are the sort of things that we want to fund in journalism. This is how we then evaluate and quantify the impact. So this is the page. If you click on that story, this is what you would be taken to. Here you can, so if you click on support this report, you can give any amount. The important part is you cannot give more than $1860. $10 has already been given, so you can only give this much. So that actually, it's like, the way to think of it is that when I'm going to buy a t-shirt, the shopkeeper doesn't tell me give how much ever you want, right? That would be absurd. He would say the price of this is $1,800, and then you give that $1,800 and you get the good that you've bought. Whereas in the social sector, the thing is, oh, give as much as you can. Like, that's a terrible way to do it. So there's a fixed price to an impact report, which we calculate based on cost price. So if this report cost $1,870, so that's how much it sells for. In the future, we might want to make it 2x cost price or 3x cost price, but to start with, we're just trying to get them to recover their costs. We also then quantify the impact in a benefit-cost ratio. So what this means is that for every dollar given to this organization, it resulted in $608 of impact. So how do we calculate this? It's obviously very controversial. Like, how would we put a dollar value to a human trafficker being put behind bars? It's very controversial, but as Nikita said on Twitter, like, if your product offends someone, it's one version away from being something special. And the way we quantified this story was we looked at the size of the human trafficking industry, which is $32 billion, and the number of women and children trafficked every year, which is 2 million. So we divide 32 billion by 2 million to get a value of $16,000 per trafficked, like per child or woman trafficked. And then we looked at how many they had trafficked over the course of their career of the human trafficker. And that's how we managed to quantify this particular impact. Yeah, there's a more complicated formula, like more complicated methodology, which you can read about. It's called relentless monetization. It's like really interesting. So we've been applying that to 27 stories so far. Yeah, so this is the last slide now, and really hope you enjoyed this talk. My partner, Nidhi, is here as well. So she's working on the next version of the product. So do get in touch with her if you are interested. This is some of the ways that you can help. One is we need evaluators. We've only quantified 27 impact reports. We need to quantify a lot more. Just these 3 media outlets we've worked with have 5,000 impact reports already. So it's a lot more work that we need to do with them. If you're a developer, it's a fully open source project. You can see Charlie sitting back there. So yeah, that's Charlie. So she's from the Poland Labs team, which built out the entire initial repo, github.com VoiceDeck. So that's another way to contribute. If you're an operator, this is the stuff that I'm majorly doing now, like fundraising, legal, outreach to other media outlets. So I've got back in touch with the outlet that published my master's thesis at Columbia, the Panama Papers. That's our North Star. We want the Panama Papers on chain. I think that would be a very historical moment for the blockchain world, where we get everyone accuses us of doing money laundering and whatnot. And if we actually got the Panama Papers to be minted on chain and the impact of that investigation to be quantified and funded, I think it would really change a lot of the narrative that we currently have to undergo. Yeah, then even if you're a media outlet, we're always looking for more impact certificates. If you're a funder, we want, if you see VoiceDeck in any Gitcoin round, please give us $1. Once we launch, we are on testnet right now. Once we launch, you can even look at an impact certificate and buy it. That's always welcome, or a direct grant as well. So, and if nothing else, just be a cheerleader. Follow us on VoiceDeck DAO on Twitter, or that's my personal handle where I tweet every day, and just trying to keep the mission alive. Yeah, thanks. So I'll ask Nidhi to talk a little bit about the future direction very quickly. That's what she's majorly working on. It's tying it back to the idea of bringing democracy to the media. So.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really nice to be here. It's great that there exists a space like the blockchain, because I've been working with governments since the past 4 or 5 years, and you see how stifling the environment can be to innovation and just being open to change. One of the things we're working currently on is because most of these reports, these journalists aren't professionally trained at Columbia or anything. They're like normal citizens like you and I, and in rural parts of India who probably did not even have access to education or a good way of life. So we're planning to take that power, the potential that people hold to speak for themselves, and tie it with making them a sort of counselors or politicians for their own neighborhoods, because currently this is something less known in India, which happens to be the world's largest democracy. Cities are currently ruled by administrators. We do not have an elected government in our major cities across India. So we're planning to use blockchain to hold local level elections in municipalities, wherein citizens can, vote these local reporters to power, and collectively decide what problem they want to solve, get it solved, get an impact certificate for that, and keep democracy sort of running in our cities. So that's where we are at right now, yeah.
So we do have 3 minutes for questions if anyone has. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Without mic. I see.
Nidhi, you can give him the mic. Nidhi?
Okay, yeah. Thanks. I see enormous potential here. I want to ask, did you test aside India in some other country, some other stories? Also, I saw you had a workshop today. Did somebody from the Croatian journalists or somebody interested participated? And also, I saw you studied philosophy and journalism. And by my understanding, investigating journalism is a bit deeper subject than just people reporting. Okay, that's the first step. But I'm missing to see the link between people reporting and covering the subject more in depth.
Right.
In that.
No, I think
Thanks.
that's actually a great question. And when I studied investigative reporting, the definition that my professor gave me was that we look at a systemic harm. So if a laborer died in a construction of a building, that's a tragedy. It's not an investigative story. But if the company had a history of flouting laws and violating safety standards, and then that person died, then it's an investigation. So you always try to look for systemic harms, and that is what investigative reporting is. We are operating in the space of solutions journalism. So journalism, where you're reporting with the hope of a solution from your reporting, and that can be divided into two parts. One part is investigative reporting, where you might spend a year going deep into a story. And the second part is citizen journalism, where it's not a very in-depth, but it's an issue that the community feels and they want to solve. So when I approached the investigative outlets, all of them told me, show us a pilot first and then we'll do it. So that was the situation with them. With the citizen journalism outlets, they were like, yes, that sounds like a good idea, let's do it. So we are doing the pilot with citizen journalism, and then we'll demonstrate that pilot to the investigative newsrooms, and that's how we plan to eventually do it.
And just to add to that, the impact reports that are published on the website follow a particular format, which is like a video, and you would see that in news channels and stuff like that. So it follows that code, and it follows the codes of journalism, because these citizens are trained by professional journalists heading these organizations that we're partnered with.
Well, thank you for this amazing speech, and I really enjoyed the idea of your whole project, which is kind of based on the local community and its strength. So I know you mentioned a bit that you have some sort of collaboration with the government, and I was wondering, have you faced any sort of challenges by the government, considering that the base of your program and the projects are the people who are complaining about lots of stuff and just noticing certain issues in the local community. So I was wondering, what's the relation with that? Thanks.
That's a great question. And in the case of citizen journalism, what I've seen is that the lower, I was working in the conflict-ridden region with the citizen journalism outlet. So what I noticed was that the lower level officers, all of them hated us because we were pointing out their flaws and what they're doing wrong. But the higher level officers loved us because they are like, this is the sort of intelligence that we require in order to drive actionable change. So higher level officers love us, lower level officers hate us. But for the insurgency, it was the opposite. The lower level soldiers loved us. They're like, I'm fighting my war to solve these problems. But the higher level insurgency leaders hated us because we were a fundamental threat to what they represented. So that's the dynamic we observed with citizen journalism. But with investigative reporting, I'm sure it will be a different ball game entirely, where a lot of the power centers would not be happy with the with not just the funding that we're giving, but the oxygen that we're giving these stories. Because normally when a journalist reports something, it's like forgotten about after that. And when the journalist moves on to the next story, but with our model, they would actually stay with the story to report future outcomes that happen from it. So that would be more threatening to the person being investigated when that journalist is kind of like a leech, he's not going to leave their side. He's going to keep sucking blood and getting more funding for doing that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious about something like how are you managing the balance between transparency and the potential threats to journalists as, coming from this transparency?
Right.
Yeah.
So right now we've just been partnering with official media outlets and organizations. So something which so we had to think about was whether to go directly to the journalist or to go through the media organizations. And we finally chose the media organizations because of the wide variability in how they funded their citizen reporters. So with CGNet, they believed in the reporters are reporting their issue because they have a complaint, not to earn money. So they're saying the same way we wouldn't pay someone to vote, you cannot pay a journalist to report, the citizen reporter. That was their model. Video volunteers pays a fixed amount for impact reports and for grievances, and per video they have a chart. With Gram Vani, our third partner, they have mobile clubs of reporters. So they said if you pay an individual reporter, that's not good. But if you pay a club, and that club then distributes money democratically, that's actually a good model. So we never wanted to get into the nitty-gritties of that and upset those functioning of those organizations. So we just give it to the organizations, and the organizations channel it according to their existing systems. Because I've seen it happen too many times that we come in with this savior complex and then we completely destroy their existing system, and then when we suddenly aren't there anymore, then they can't even go back to their old way of functioning. So that's very harmful.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking about a friend that had to go undercover the Tijuana cartel for 3 years. So,
Right.
so definitely he doesn't really could use his name transparently out there.
Right.
Good way.
Yep.
Hi Devansh, that was great, and definitely lots to think about in the context of journalism. Just to follow on the idea of the previous question, journalism today is becoming more and more dangerous. We've seen what happened in Gaza. There's been dozens of journalists murdered and killed in the line of doing their work, and lots of other countries around the world where journalists have been targeted by people in power, the military and the governments of the day. So I'm just wondering, how does the system that you're proposing, how is it going to provide maybe a high level of protection for journalists who maybe want to do investigative journalism but can't do it in a public way, which would be revealing their individual status and become a target of attacks?
Right. So the way OCCRP does it, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, is by changing the incentives of attacking a reporter. So in the case of Azerbaijan, the regime threw one of the journalists behind bars, and because of that, OCCRP put 5 other reporters, including me, on that same dictator. So the incentives change that now if you actually target a journalist, you're going to get 5 other journalists investigating the same issue. So you're in a worse situation than you were before you did something against them. So that's how the media outlets are responding to these threats. But when it comes to the security angle, I think you have to rely on the Reuters and the New York Times and the others who actually have standard operating and good security and other things. That's one way. And the second way, which is more bottom up, is actually strengthening citizen journalism in these areas. So things like what Nidhi shared, that we use a government ID to give everyone in that area a vote, and they can then elect who they think can represent their community and issues well. And then that person can be given, they have legitimacy then. The community has elected them using these blockchain systems where you can vote in real time. It's not every 5 years. If you don't like him anymore, change your vote immediately. And so then once that legitimacy can actually hopefully strengthen citizen journalism in some of these areas. So it's top down, Reuters, New York Times and all their security detail, and bottom up, which is citizen journalists in these war-torn areas. Yeah.
You ever saw the Pursuance network? I think it was
Yeah. Yeah, this is the last question, then we have to stop. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. I'd like to ask a question about social bonds. So in classical approach, usually like a private market invests money into building some social venture, and then the government or some philanthropist pays for that success, right? So my question, in your use case, like, how is it actually working? Who buys impact certs? Do you have any concerns or like strategies to overcome this problem? Thank you.
Right. I think that's the main hypothesis that we need to test once we move on to OP mainnet, which is where is the buying pressure for impact certificates going to come from? So the two models that we're going to test out, one is a B2C model, where we are trying to target the gifting market. So whenever someone makes a donation and buys an impact certificate, they can leave a comment underneath that impact certificate. So those comments could be things like, I'm buying this for my daughter's graduation ceremony, or because of a funeral to remember this person, I'm buying this impact in her name. So that's one model, which is the B2C, people buying it individually. And the second is that we receive, like the B2B model is we go to existing media funders and tell them that, hey, you can donate to this wallet, and that wallet automatically goes to buying the highest rated impact certificates. So the benefit cost ratio that we computed, if there are 5 certificates, it can go to buying them in the order of rating or score that they've received. So those are the 2 ways that we have planned for how we can actually get buying pressure for impact certificates. But this is really the main question of whether we succeed or fail, that will it actually have buyers, this whole idea of an impact certificate. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk. Yeah. Yeah.